Close Up is brought to you by the Kia Sorento R, redefining the power of Kia.
OK, it's not likely to go down well if the government introduces minimum pricing for alcohol. There'll be plenty of aggrieved and aggravated drinkers asking why should they pay more because of other people's problems. Those who back the idea say the difference to your average sensible drinker will be a few bucks a month, if that, but it could save lives. And they argue it's essential if we're going to turn our binge drinking culture around. Jill Higgins checks out what it means for all of us.
We have got a serious drinking problem.
How much will you be drinking tonight?
Maybe a box of 4-pack. Yeah. 4 8%ers.
So what's the aim tonight?
Man.
We've tried education, but in the last 10 years, the volume of booze we're knocking back has gone up by 9%.
The evidence for education in these kind of things is very small. And yet we continue to put millions of dollars into it. It is actually quite a scandal.
A scandal to keep pushing education, and a scandal, says this addiction expert, not to get rid of really cheap drinks.
Up to K Road and the back streets are clogged with young people preloading with cheap booze.
It's something we can tackle with a strategy called minimum pricing.
Raising the price is the most effective thing that a government can do. We've got to become a drunk-free country. We're not trying to become a drink-free country. We're not trying to ban alcohol.
This is how it works. A baseline cost is set per unit of alcohol, let's say $1.50. So a standard beer, which is 1.3 units, would cost $1.95. This 12-pack already works out as more than that, but the cost of these Rheinecks would have to go up to the minimum price of $23.40. What do you think of that as an idea?
I reckon they shouldn't put the price up, really. No, I reckon beer should be a good price so you can buy it all the time.
So for wine, the high and mid-range prices won't be affected. It's these ones. The bargain bins and the cheapy specials will be gone from our shelves for good. The minimum price for a bottle of wine would be $10.50.
I like it cheap, but you know, $10 for a bottle of wine's probably okay.
And with other drinks, these ciders would stay the same, but this El Cheapo gin would double to $20. Doesn't sit too well with some shoppers.
I should be allowed to buy my own wine or my own alcohol at the price that I want, and everybody should be responsible for their own drinking patterns.
United Future's Peter Dunn says it discriminates.
Chardonnay socialists who can pay $25, $30 a bottle of wine will still be able to get their wine. I think that's really elitist and ridiculous.
And John Key seems a little uncertain about what it will mean.
Is that what people are likely to do is trade, therefore, price with quality. Instead of buying, some $9 stuff and some $13, wine, we'll end up just, trading it and buying all of it at 11, which will be less good quality.
This isn't the case, and starkly contrasts with opinion leaders in Scotland and the UK, where minimum pricing is a goer.
I said months ago that we needed to get to grips with the problem of super cheap alcohol that's fueling violence on our streets, and I think this minimum unit pricing is a big part of the answer.
We will see a fall in hospital admissions, we will see a fall in the kind of behaviour that leads to increased attendance at accident emergency departments.
And this shows a radical government not frightened of taking big decisions, rolling up its sleeves and getting on with the job.
In New Zealand, it's exactly what the doctor ordered.
There's overwhelming international information that if you put economic pressure, i.e. put the prices up of alcohol and have at least a minimum price, so you can't have cut price alcohol around the place, that has one of the biggest influences on changing people's behaviour.
How come the Prime Minister is ignoring everything, both the public and the evidence? And there's only one conclusion, that is that the alcohol industry is having a tremendous influence. They don't want alcohol reform. They thrive on the heavy drinking culture.
But this expert in retail behaviour says minimum pricing simply won't work.
What we've seen with the group that's most affected, that sort of 18 to 24-year-old, price changes don't have any real effect in terms of the amount that they're going to purchase or consume.
Uni students are the most common binge drinkers, so he ran an experiment changing the price of the alcohol they bought.
Even with price changes up to 25% or increases up to 25%, there was no real change in terms of the amount that was going to be purchased or consumed.
But the recommendations for minimum pricing are based on evidence. They say it's worked in other countries. How did your research find otherwise?
New Zealanders and Australians perhaps could be quite different in terms of their attitudes towards drinking.
So the argument that it works for cigarettes, what's the difference there?
When it comes to smoking, the government and all of the initiatives that have been put in place are designed to try and stop people smoking. Now, pricing is very good as a sledgehammer that says don't do something because it's now too expensive. But if you're trying to say just try and curb it a little bit, it's a very finely tuned thing. That's hard to get right.
It's one of several measures campaigners are calling for. They want a change in culture and less blatant advertising. But mostly, they want the end of pocket money drinks, even if it costs some sensible drinkers an extra few dollars a week.
The heavy drinking culture is such an all-pervasive issue that we all have to contribute something if there is going to be change.
Joining me now is the Justice Minister, Judith Collins. She's the one guiding the alcohol reforms through Parliament. Minister, is minimum pricing going to be part of those reforms?
Well, it's something that Justice is looking at, Mark. It's certainly
since August
not
2010.
part of the bill. Well, they've been looking at it and they will continue to. We've got countries, for instance, like Scotland that have passed a law change to bring it in, but we still haven't seen what's actually happened as a result of that. And I think it's really important that we look at that, but it's not part of the bill, it's not part of the government supplementary order paper.
But the Health Ministry, the Justice Ministry, the Prime Minister's own advisor, Peter Gluckman, Drug Foundation, just about anyone you care to mention all say this is a really good idea.
Well, I'm not sure that it necessarily is, and I'm not going to bring about or ask Parliament to bring about law changes that will affect many responsible drinkers when we don't actually have the research. The only research we have got in New Zealand is that you've just mentioned, which is the AUT research that showed that actually young people would, over 25% increase in alcohol would still not affect their buying behaviours. What does matter to them is what their peers do and what they think.
What do you mean you don't know whether it's going to have any effect? You would have to bring something in if you don't know what it's going to do?
Well, I'm not prepared to say to Parliament, let's put on hold all the really good reforms that we've got in the Alcohol Reform Bill while we put together a piece or a change to legislation which might not, in fact, bring about the effects that people want it to. Because what we're not dealing with cigarettes here, we're dealing with a situation where a $9 bottle of wine today would, under the Labour Party's view of $2 per alcoholic drink, standard drink, would actually cost $16 for everybody. Whether or not that's going to make a scrap of difference to the binge drinking is not something we've seen any results on yet.
But doesn't all the research say this affects the bottom, the cheap end of the market? If it's, say, $1.50, as we saw in Jill Higgins' piece, it's not going to affect most people at all. I'm just asking, what evidence do you have that this is going to affect the large number of people, which I suspect is the worry you have?
Well, actually, it also would affect necessarily the people who are the poorest New Zealanders, people who don't get the chance to, whether or not they buy a $35 bottle of Chardonnay. These are the people who were, some of the research is showing that they would be, in fact, the people most affected. Are they necessarily the people we want affected? I think what we want to deal with is binge drinking, not necessarily people who are not necessarily well off.
So a $9 1 litre bottle of vodka or gin is not a problem in your mind?
No, I said wine, not vodka.
No, but this affects all alcohol, though. I mean, we saw tonight, you can buy a bottle of gin, a 1 litre bottle of gin for under $10.
But the fact is, Mark, if someone doesn't buy a $10 bottle of gin, or they do now, and you put the price up to, I don't know, what, about $16, is that necessarily going to make a great difference? But I've also, Mark, is that the hospitality industry has said to me that they would support a minimum pricing of alcohol. And the reason is, Mark, because it's maximum profits for the industry. Now, I think people haven't thought that through. They haven't thought about where is the money going. Increases in prices are actually a guaranteed profit for the alcohol industry.
Has the same alcohol industry been lobbying you and your colleagues?
Well, they've been lobbying everybody that I'm aware of. I mean, this bill, for instance, has been around for around about 3 years. I've certainly met with the alcohol industry when they've asked to meet with me, but mostly they've met with my officials. But they certainly haven't been talking to me about minimum pricing, because I've asked the industry, the justice officials, to get on with their work which they are completing and to see whether or not this is something that we should look at a later stage.
OK, if they at a later stage, so this is not going to happen in any hurry, even if the report comes back to you and says there's value in this, it's not going to happen for a while.
Mark, this bill has been around for about 3 years. It's got measures in it like local alcohol policies to give communities to say whether or not they have liquor stores on every corner like they have now. It's got provisions in there to actually limit the time that alcohol can be sold. These are sorts of provisions, and giving parents responsibility for their children. These are the sort of provisions that I want to see come in and which will make a difference. I don't think we should hold up the passage of this bill waiting for research to come through. We need to actually get on with it, and if at a later date it shows that there should be minimum pricing, that's for the government to look at along with Parliament.
OK, I mean, I come back to you, despite the fact that people such as the Prime Minister's own science advisor describe it as the #1 factor influencing availability and accessibility, it is not going to be on the agenda this term.
Well, I've said it's not going to be part of this bill because this bill needs to get through. We've got local authorities like Auckland Council saying to me, when can we get the local alcohol policies in place? It's being held up, waiting to get this bill through. And the other thing is the New Zealand research has shown it is unlikely to make a scrap of difference to young binge drinkers.
The New Zealand research, you mean the one study done by the AUT?
AUT, it is exactly the sort of target market that we're looking at, the people who are most likely to be out binge drinking, young university students. Isn't that what we're seeing as a problem?
Judith Collins, Justice Minister, we appreciate your time tonight.